My name is Clara Wren Montgomery. And until that morning, I believed my life was perfectly planned. I was 32, a museum curator in New York, the daughter of one of the city's most celebrated philanthropists. I spent my days surrounded by sculptures and silence, my evenings at charity galas where I smiled on command. I was polite, polished, predictable. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I felt like a guest in my own life. That feeling became impossible to ignore on the morning of my mother's memorial. The sun had barely risen when the reporters arrived. They lined the church steps like vultures, waiting for another quote, another photo. Inside, marble columns glowed under the soft candlelight. My father, Edward Montgomery, stood tall at the altar, his grief rehearsed to perfection. As the service began, I tried to keep my composure, but then a woman I had never seen before stood up from the last pew. She held a small envelope in her trembling hands. "This," she said, her voice shaking, "it was meant for Clara. From her mother." The room fell into stunned silence. My father's jaw tightened. "Sit down," he hissed, but the woman ignored him. She walked straight toward me and placed the envelope in my lap. My name was written on it in my mother's looping handwriting. I looked up at my father, but he refused to meet my eyes. The world seemed to fade as I opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, yellowed at the edges, with just 9 words written in blue ink. "Forgive me, my love. The truth will set you free." And beneath it, a small silver key. That key changed everything. After the funeral, my father pretended nothing had happened. He hosted donors in the drawing room while I slipped quietly upstairs to my mother's study. I had never been allowed in there. The door was locked, but the little silver key fit perfectly into the handle. The room smelled faintly of lilacs and old paper. Stacks of letters, photographs, and diaries filled the shelves. And in the center of the desk was a file stamped with a name I didn't recognize, Marina Ellison. I opened it, and my heart stopped. Inside were legal documents, birth records, hospital forms, my mother's signature, but beside it, not my father's. Another man's name. And then a photo. A young woman holding a newborn baby wrapped in a wool blanket. The woman looked exactly like me. My hands began to shake. The birth certificate said Clara Ellison. Place of birth, Willow Creek, Oregon. Not New York. Not the city where I'd lived my entire life. I stumbled backward, the room spinning. Downstairs, my father's voice echoed faintly through the marble halls. That's when I realized. I wasn't his daughter. The truth was hiding in plain sight, buried beneath decades of lies. By nightfall, I was on a train headed west, clutching the only thing my mother had left me, that silver key and the name Marina Ellison. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I needed to find her. Willow Creek was a quiet town, tucked between forests and forgotten rail lines. The kind of place where everyone knew each other's stories, except mine. At the edge of town stood a small, faded bookstore called The Willow's Secret. I stepped inside, the bell above the door chiming softly. A woman with streaks of grey in her dark hair looked up from behind the counter. Her eyes, sea glass green, widened the moment she saw me. "Clara," she whispered, as if saying my name pulled a ghost from the past. I froze. "How do you know my name?" She reached for a photograph behind the register, a picture of herself 30 years younger, holding a baby. That same blanket. That same smile. "I'm Marina," as she said softly. "My name used to be Ellison." before Edward Montgomery took you. My knees buckled. The air left my lungs. She guided me to a chair, her hands shaking. Your mother, Grace, was my sister, she said. And Edward, he was supposed to be your guardian. But he never gave you back. It didn't make sense. Why would my mother's own sister give me away? Marina explained everything. When I was born, my mother was critically ill. She had asked her older sister to care for me temporarily, until she recovered. But Edward, her ambitious, powerful husband, saw an opportunity. He told everyone the baby had died during complications. He falsified documents, moved across the country, and raised me as his own. My mother never forgave herself for trusting him. The silver key, Marina explained, opened a box hidden beneath the bookstore floorboards. Together, we pried up the old wood panels and uncovered a small chest. Inside were dozens of letters, written in my mother's handwriting. Each one addressed to me. My dearest Clara, one began, if you're reading this, it means the lie has finally broken. She wrote about how she searched for me for years, how Edward silenced her with threats and power, and how Marina had kept my letters safe, waiting for the day I would return. Tears blurred my vision. All those years I thought my mother had been distant, cold even. She had been fighting for me. Fighting and losing to a man who built an empire on control and deceit. By the time I returned to New York, I wasn't the same woman who had left. I wasn't the obedient daughter or the perfect curator. I was a woman who knew the truth. And I was ready to face him. When I walked into my father's study, he looked up from his desk, startled. You shouldn't have gone digging, he said coldly. I found my mother's letters, I replied. His face hardened. Grace was weak. She didn't understand what was best for you. No, I said, my voice trembling. You didn't understand what love was. He slammed his fist against the desk. I gave you everything, he shouted. I looked him straight in the eyes and whispered, accept the truth. The weeks that followed were a blur of lawyers and reporters. Marina helped me file for the restoration of my real birth records. When the story broke, the city that once admired Edward Montgomery turned its back on him. Charities withdrew. Investors fled. He was charged with fraud and falsifying legal documents. The same people who once applauded his generosity and now called him a thief. But I didn't seek revenge. I just wanted peace. After the trial, I left New York for good. Marina and I reopened the Willow's Secret together. We filled the shelves with second-hand books and little handwritten notes tucked between pages, messages of hope for anyone who might need them. Sometimes, when I closed the shop at night, I read one of my mother's letters aloud. The walls seemed to hum with her voice. Her last letter ends with these words. You are not what was taken from you, my Clara. You are what you choose to give back. Now, every morning, sunlight filters through the old windows, and the smell of coffee mixes with the scent of aging paper. Children come in after school to read by the fireplace. Tourists wander through, smiling at the handwritten notes they find tucked in their books. And sometimes, when the train passes by in the distance, I think of my mother and whisper, I'm home. Because I am. Not in the house I grew up in, but in the truth I finally found. My name is Clara Ellison Montgomery. And this is where my story begins. Not with betrayal or loss, but with the quiet strength it takes to rebuild a life that was never truly yours. Because sometimes, freedom doesn't arrive with a bang. It arrives with a whisper. and the soft turn of a page in a little bookstore at the edge of town. Did you enjoy the story? And where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you liked this story, you can support my channel by sending a super thanks, so I can keep creating more heart-touching life stories like this. Thank you so much for being here. On the screen, you'll see 2 more stories I know you'll love. Real, emotional, and unforgettable. Don't forget to subscribe. And I'll see you in the next life story. With love and gratitude.